and John.
Did I ask you guys earlier, you guys up front, do you guys have Advil drugs?
Advil?
Drugs, yeah. Do you have drugs? Advil? Well, I had some Tylenol that didn't work. So
Headache?
yeah, a little bit. So if I see him a little subdued, it probably won't last, but if I see him a little subdued,
A little caffeine will help with that.
You ever
too.
try Excedrin?
I had some caffeine. I'm sorry,
Did you ever
Excedrin.
try
Actually,
Excedrin?
Excedrin's fantastic. You have some?
I don't. But that works much better than,
Well, I think this is a tension headache.
yeah.
And it's usually the Advil helps. So, you know, it's probably not a good thing when you're talking about Bible discernment to talk about drugs immediately, but So, from last year, gosh, it seems like an age ago, I discussed the evolution of National Socialism and its direct ties to Christianity. That was fantastic and it was a lot of fun. But one of the things that I didn't get to discuss, and the reason that National Socialism gained so much traction with Christians, was altruism. It's the moral standard of self-sacrifice. So anyway, I'm thinking, yes, this is the direction I'd like to head. And a few months went by, and I happened to be watching some blog conversations. Had a series of individual conversations with some people, and the discussion of determinism came up. Now, I know determinism on some level was addressed last year. But I realized that people really struggle to answer the determinist charge. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how many people struggle, which I find fascinating. I find fascinating that in the United States, a nation that has demonstrated rugged individualism, self-appointment, individual purpose, and has demonstrated that it has set the standard for human prosperity and ability across the globe, that we in the United States struggle to answer the determinist charge. And then over the course of the last, politically, the last, I would say 6-8 years, we have seen the undertone, or the presumption of determinism in our political class. Not least of which, and we'll get into this in great detail later, is behavioral or environmental determinism. How many over the course of the last few years have you heard people insist that white people can't help but to be racist? Well, this is a standard theme within our political class. The white people can't escape their racism. And that as such, the government must necessarily step in to fix what is implicit to their existence. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized really and truly, and of course, when you're talking to any Calvinist, the big elephant in the room, the presumption behind every argument they make, is their predetermined right to dictate doctrine. And that's when I had a series of conversations with Paul, and finally I said, you know what, I'm gonna have to jump into the middle of this. Determinism is not an ancillary question in terms of human existence. The answer to determinism is essential to being able to understand why individuality and freedom are essential. So, that's what I decided to do. Why is determinism such a big issue? Why is it so central philosophically to every tyrannical organization? And I just gave away my question. The issue is tyranny. For those of you who can't see this, I'm hoping that everybody can. Yes, I see it on there. I see you seeing this. This is actually, and I've said this before in other conferences, this is my contribution to philosophy. These are the 5 elements of tyranny. All tyrannical bodies of thought, can you see me point? Yes, you can. All tyrannical bodies of thought have these 5 fundamental elements. Dictated good. All the doctrines fall into these fundamental categories. Dictated good, universal guilt, the abolition of ambition, collective conformity, and incompetent masses. Now here's how determinism touches all 5 branches. The abolition of ambition. If you have no volition, if you can take no free action, you cannot improve your life. So why try? Incompetent masses. Your incompetence is not your fault. You have no choice. You will be absolved of bad things in your life if you allow those people who are in charge of the utopian prestige take charge. Universal guilt. Your social sin is part of your nature. We have two options of determinism. We have the secular behaviorists, white racists as an example, and we have the Christian version, which is original sin dictates that you cannot help but sin. So you have a universal guilt that must then ultimately have a dictated good. Somebody must stand up and tell you, because you can't help yourself. We know what's good, so we're going to compel you by force of government. And the last one is called collective conformity. How dare you seek to rise above your station? Don't you know that you can't improve yourself? Don't you understand you are fighting the forces of the universe that have placed you where you belong? Why do you want to stand out from the crowd? Are you proud? Are you arrogant? Don't you understand you're just a sinner? Now, we have in the world, and we're going to discuss this at length, we have two versions of determinism philosophically throughout history. And the first one is the mystic version of determinism. And this is that God controls everything, God is sovereign. And the challenge is that how dare you believe you can improve your life? Because God has appointed you where you belong. And your ambition, remember the abolition of ambition? Your ambition to do otherwise is proof positive of your fundamental metaphysical sinful nature. We have the second version. This came much later in history. Well, actually, that's not quite true. We have the materialist version of determinism. That biology, environment, and natural law determines everything. So the answer to the question of determinism and why it is so essential is because it touches all five areas. It is a foundational doctrine for all determinist philosophies. So I said to myself, how do I explain this? How do we figure out how to answer the determinist charge? And I toyed with suggesting that you should get out your Bibles. And I thought some of you would have a heart attack because I've never suggested you get out your Bibles. And the answer is no, don't get out your Bibles, because this particular conversation is not satisfied by a scripture stacking debate. It cannot be. You cannot resolve this issue with Bible verses, because the appeal to Bible verses is really the appeal to authority. That's really what this is about. And authority, conceptually, is not a metaphysical premise. You cannot appeal to authority to explain the evolution and value, the structure of philosophy. So since I am not going to discuss the issue of philosophy, I probably should introduce myself. I do this every year at the conference because I think it's very, very important. My name is John Immel, and I am no one from nowhere. And I say this in deliberate contrast to the important people in the Neo-Calvinist Church who insist that their authority and who they are is essential for why you should actually have to listen to them.
You have not been peer reviewed.
I have not been peer reviewed. That's an inside joke for those of you watching online. I was taken to task on the Wartburg Watch for that my ideas had not been sufficiently peer reviewed, and because I had not been peer reviewed, I couldn't possibly know what I was talking about. Whatever. I'm here to give you my best rational argument, and because I believe that the nature of independent thinking, free men require valid ideas and validated ideas to arrive at good conclusions, the right conclusions, I'm going to make my best rational argument. And then I'm going to expect you to do what I've always expected, to think, and to decide that if it's true. You are a jury of one in the realm of reason, and it is your job to validate your own ideas. So, having said that, endless, shameless, capitalist plug, I wrote this book that was not peer-reviewed, Blight in the Vineyard. I got to read my own tagline so I remember it. Exposing the roots, myths, and emotional torment of spiritual tyranny. I wrote this, Well, I wrote it 3 separate times, but this version I think I put out in I've forgotten, 2009, 2010. Anyway, it doesn't matter. This book originally was about Sovereign Grace Ministries, not quite exactly, let me amend. This book discusses Sovereign Grace Ministries as the poster child for the evolution into the Neo-Calvinist movement. But it really isn't about Sovereign Grace Ministries. It's about the doctrines that drove them to their given end. Now, I feel actually very vindicated. While some of this is a touch dated, Paul, I see you have a question on your face.
No, no,
Okay. Some of this is a touch dated because, of course, now Sovereign Grace Ministries has fallen apart, I think. C.J. Mahaney has traveled to points unknown out of Gaithersburg, Maryland, and the church structure that was Sovereign Grace Ministries has disbanded on some level. I don't know. I do feel vindicated because way back when I was telling the cowards at Covenant Life Church, one of the lead churches in Gaithersburg, Maryland, that C.J. Mahaney was the big dog of that whole reform movement, and that he pretty much controlled everything. They poo-pooed me and said, no, that's not true. We have an apostolic team, blah, blah, blah. It was all a joke because at the end of the day, when it really mattered, when push came to shove, C.J. Mahaney proved that no one had the ability within that organizational structure to call him to account. He proved it. So anyway, that was a brief aside. I feel very vindicated, and I'm very proud of the fact that I called that probably 20 years before anybody else had the nerve to say so. So for those of you who like the stuff that I talk about, I encourage you to buy my book. It's $23.99 on Amazon. And I will say this, I have not asked for this since I put the book out. And I have gone back and forth in my head. I really wanted the reviews online to be organic. And I have not asked for reviews. But I have been told by people in email and in person that they really like it. But those reviews don't end up online. So I guess I'm going to ask. If you have, and I don't really care. If you don't like what I said, fine, say so and say why. It doesn't really matter to me. Certainly if you have good things to say about me, that'll be nice. I'd like to hear it. But ultimately, I would invite those of you who have read the book and like it, give me a review online. That would be fantastic. That will help. And since determinist ideas are determined, they cannot possibly rebut what I just said because the content of their mind is automatic, right? No. So, here's what I'm going to do in discussing the issue of determinism. To achieve my goal, I'm going to do what I usually do. I'm going to introduce you to the essential philosophical elements impacted by determinism. I'm going to give you a history of determinism. And then, in the last couple of lectures, I'm going to give you a rebuttal to the determinist philosophical arguments. Here's what I am not going to do. This is not an exhaustive study. This is merely a survey. We're going to skip over quite a few people, and we're not going to get too deep into how each individual thinker arrived at his position of determinism. This is high-level stuff. And I am not going to reconcile Christian doctrine to the doctrine of free will. And this is probably going to be a big deal for some of you because you're going to want to understand how to address the Calvinists that you meet. We'll get to some of that, but this is not an exhaustive study of scriptures as such. I think the reason I'm not going to do that is because I ultimately think that's a fool's errand. To successfully rebut, Paul opened up his comments today with that we have suffered under the theological academicians for the last, since the Reformation. And this is absolutely true. And to gain any real rebuttal to why modern Protestant thinkers think what they think, it will require a full evaluation of canon formation and development. It will require a full evaluation of systematic theology. I put this out as homework online on my blog, asking people to start looking into what systematic theology really is. It is the dominant interpretive practice in conjunction with Luther's interpretive practice. It is the method by which they enforce their particular doctrinal perspectives. And I wanted people to start looking into what systematic theology really was. And without a full evaluation and then a successful rebuttal, it would be almost impossible to explain the distinctions. Its central weakness, the central weakness of systematic theology, and its contrast to the developments after the Enlightenment of higher critical methodology. So that's what I'm not going to do. Click to slide 2. Yes, that is slide 2. So here are some definitions that we're going to actually have some association with. There's a quiz later, so pay attention. Determinism, also known as fatalism. All events are necessitated by previous causes. Mechanistic determinism is natural law determines all causal chains. Behaviorism, environment or genetics determine human action. Theological determinism, God, whichever one you pick, determines human action. We then have it broken down between two versions. Soft determinism. Determinism is true and man, we are morally free. Hard determinism. Determinism is true, therefore there is no human free will. And then the theories related to moral responsibility. Compatibilism. We can be free, morally responsible, even if determinism is true. And incompatibilism. We cannot be free or morally responsible if determinism is true. I told you. What is soft determinism?
Both free will and
Yeah.
determinism. It's really a paradox.
You're exactly right. It is a paradox. What is compatibilism? Anybody?
We can be free or morally responsible if determinism is true.
That's correct. And of course, what is hard determinism? This is going to be the one that we're going to encounter the most. Its variation. What is hard determinism?
Determinism is true.
That's exactly right. That's right. Okay, so we will take a very brief timeout while I rearrange my papers. Okay, from the beginning, determinism. Now we are actually going back to when I'm discussing this, we're going to talk about primordial history. This is, gosh, before 600 BC. This is the Code of Hammurabi and prior. This is the ancient Middle East. This is India before recorded history. And this was an informal, you gotta understand, modern philosophy and Western thought does not really start until about 500 BC. So these are loose approximations in as much as we have come to understand them historically. The leading worldly ideas, and I want you to remember, anytime you hear somebody talk about worldly ideas, I want you to put these three things back in your head. These are the top three things that I can have identified up till now. That we see throughout all world religions and world cultures. And these are early variations. Man must sacrifice his existence. Man is a cog in the collective machine, and man's existence is fated by the gods. Whenever you hear somebody pound the pulpit about worldly ideas and trying to make the distinction between biblical ideas and worldly ideas, put this in your head. These three are the most worldly of all worldly ideas on the planet. They have dominated every religion since the inception of man's efforts to solve and ask these questions in his existence. If you care to read some ancient creation myths, Google list of creation myths. Just Google it, and it'll come up at a wiki page. Actually, it's pretty good. It'll give you actually a pretty good evaluation. And if you're inclined to check, peer review my stuff, by all means, go ahead and knock yourself out. The generalized theme of these myths: the gods created the world. A hero is confronted with a moral quest. He crosses/encounters the god, the great spirit, or a supernatural being. Man's actions are fated. The gods judge the moral action. The underlying story questions. How close, here's the underlying story questions at large. How close to annoying/challenging the gods can man get without suffering their wrath? The means of assuaging divine wrath are universally, the solution is sacrifice. Destroy a human value to prevent the gods from raining down destruction. Sacrifices range from harvest sacrifices to animal sacrifices to human sacrifices. Sacrifice is a central feature of all religions on the planet. The fundamental presumption is that man must sacrifice some value of his existence to the gods. This has been universal, and the most worldly of all worldly ideas. From our records, these early cultures didn't conceptualize a conflict between free moral agency and divine determinism. It was kind of a given. The conundrum, if you will, they didn't actually make an effort to distinguish. Man was a cog in a cosmic wheel, and in Eastern and Middle Eastern sources conceptualize the world as an ongoing causal cycle. And I want you to see this, because this is, this was man's metaphysical framework for almost the entirety of early philosophy. This was man's existence: death, birth, life, old age. And it was specifically related to, and on some level, ancient man had a reason to think this, because he could see this in his life: winter, spring, summer, fall. And he saw this cycle throughout. And so it really didn't challenge. And this concept is not really centrally challenged until the Jews. The Jews were the first people to have, if you will, 6 days of creation, 1 day of rest. This is one of the earliest forms of a conception, of a linear conception of time. It actually segments man's existence from this cycle and actually puts in man's consciousness a beginning, a progression from work to rest. In other words, man became the center of his existence as he worked, and then he got to celebrate his rest in that existence. That concept does not show up until the Jews. It's actually one of the most profound. The two things that the Jews gave us, the Israelites, is radical monotheism. In other words, you can have no other gods. And this concept, obliterating this concept here, taking this out of our thinking and putting in a linear concept running from work to rest. And man is the center recipient of that. Okay? So now, this worldview, the second people to finally step into the fray and to challenge this worldview is, of course, the Greeks. And they did it very differently than Jewish thought. Where am I at? The Greeks began their formal philosophical investigation circa 600 BCE. This started the conflict between fate and fate, aka determinism, and free will. In the TAG 2013 lectures, Western thought begins with Heraclitus. For those of you who watched my stuff, I actually took this on in detail in my TAG 2013 lectures, the evolution of Western thought. Because without an understanding of the evolution of Western thought, it is impossible to understand where Christianity starts, what it encountered, and what it has actually become. With Heraclitus, if you'll remember, Heraclitus said the world is in a constant state of flux. Existence is nothing but change. Therefore, the world is unknowable. Since man abhors chaos, like nature abhors a vacuum, Western thinkers sought to answer the chaos. They could not abide a worldview that said it really can't be known. They wanted to identify the rules of the world. And the first person to do this was a man by the name of Parmenides. His answer to chaos was, all things are one. Heraclitus, everything is motion, everything changes, nothing is solid. Parmenides says, nope, everything is one. Everything is one and it is unchanging. The one is unchanging. And what is eternal. It does not go out of existence. Heraclitus, everything is in flux, there really is nothing, things go in and out of existence all the time. Parmenides, everything is one. What one is eternal and unchanging. What is this one thing? No one knew. Parmenides then creates the opposite problem. If this is the case, then everything is static. Nothing can move or change or grow. And this, of course, these two ideas stand in contrast to one another. And it's just as unlivable, each solution. The two positions are irreconcilable, and each, in its own way, is unlivable. Enter the Pythagoreans. I would dub these guys the first villains in history, but not really. They didn't mean to be bad. They really genuinely, from their stage and in the evolution of thought, had reasons to believe what they thought, and of course, they gave us music, mathematics. They were impressive people. Their solution, the two worlds. One is in constant flux to satisfy Heraclitus. The other is immutable to satisfy Parmenides. So now we have a third alternative between everything is chaos, everything is immutable, but now reality is divided between two worlds. This is the central point of the soul-body dichotomy, the division of man between spirit and matter. And this is the reason they are ultimately what I would consider philosophical villains. This is the first time we see in human history a formal statement that man is functionally divided. So Western thinkers struggle over these three options until we get to the atomists. And you said 11:45, correct? I like timelines because I want people to see how ideas progress. I want them to understand none of this is in isolation. All of this has something that came before and something that came after. And in every instance, you will see as people go through, they are trying to wrestle with what people have said prior. Yes? You understand? Okay, so the atomists show up, and these people are important to the discussion of determinism. They agreed with Heraclitus, change, process, action, motion is too obvious a fact to deny. So Heraclitus must be right on some level. They agreed with Parmenides. Existence cannot vanish into nothing. Nothing can go out of existence. This is also true. But they rejected the Pythagorean two worlds theory. Here was the atomist solution, and it's actually pretty elegant considering what they knew and when they knew it. They abandoned Parmenides' monism. In other words, everything is just one thing. And they said, now we have many things. The world is made up of many things. But these things have the ability to move. Locomotion does not violate Parmenides' principle because nothing is coming into existence or going out of existence. There is no internal change and no alteration of these individual qualities, but the constant mixing of these things will answer Heraclitus. So we can have change in motion, and we can have something that doesn't go out of existence, and we've actually got a solution to the metaphysical nature of the universe. So what are these things? There were a number of different men who gave answers, but these two men are the ones tied to our current discussion of determinism. The first person is named Leucippus. The second one is named Democritus. And they come under the subheading atomists. Their theory was so influential that you, living almost 3,000 years later, will immediately recognize it. Their theory, everything is made up of particles. The particles move and reorganize, accounting for change. The particles are eternal and never go out of existence. Reality is made up of these particles. Reality is packed so full of these particles that it cannot be cut. What then do we call these particles? The Greek word for uncuttable was atoma. I think I'm pronouncing that. You're the Greek scholar amongst us. Atoma. We'll call it that, right?
Sounds good.
We, of course, call them atoms. Like I said, 3,000 years later, we know more about what they hypothesized almost 3,000 years later, but they turned out to be correct. And here are some Democritus and Leucippus quotes. Sweet by convention, bitter by convention, color by convention, but in reality, atoms and the void alone exist. Leucippus, nothing occurs at random, but everything for a reason and by necessity. The atomist conclusion, all change is nothing but spatial change of atomic position, but atoms are immutable. This solves, of course, Heraclitus, everything is in flux, and it solves Parmenidean problem, everything is eternal. But this raised the next question. How do these atoms operate? What determines how atoms behave? The answer, atomic motion is the result of physical pressure and the impact from one atom and their physical reaction accordingly. Hence was born the billiard ball metaphysic. You can, of course, imagine the pool table, pool ball, pool cue. The interaction of the balls reflect the action of the atoms, and everything operates this way, everything. First, this means that nothing ever happens by chance. There is no causeless action. Everything is determined by the atomic configuration and the various pressures and reactions of mechanical law. Second, and most importantly, there is no teleology. What does teleological mean? Teleological is the assertion that nature, existence, or reality tend toward a final end, or said another way, a final cause is specifically tied to purpose, or meaning and outcome are intertwined. The teleological position, God willed this end. That's a teleological position. The whole of existence has God's intention behind it. Everything that happens for this purpose. The atomists said no. There is no such thing as purpose. This is all mechanistic. So the question is then, does man using the cue have a purpose? And the atomist rebuttal was, man using the cue functions exactly on the same principle as the billiard balls. Man is also called a colliding system of atoms. Atoms collided and caused parts of his body to start quivering, and that caused him to pick up the pool cue and take a shot. Notice the irony. The atomists were trying to solve a fundamental problem between Heraclitus and Parmenides, and ultimately created the first hard determinist theory known to man. They didn't try to do this, but this is ultimately what it ended up being. This branch of determinism is called mechanistic determinism. Remember our pop quiz. You're going to hear this again, because this doesn't go away. Materialism, matter is the fundamental reality, and anything non-material is simply a derivative or byproduct to be explained entirely in physical terms. Mechanism, everything happens according to the laws of mechanics. And if you're interested in my slides, I'll be glad to give them to you. This is in contrast to teleology. Purpose operates in the universe. Religious teleologists say that the universe's purpose is appointed by God. Everything within the universe is infused with divine purpose. What is that purpose? No one knows. Naturalistic teleologists, some part of the universe has a purpose. Living, conscious creatures, or man only. Purposeful behavior is a myth. That the essence of meaning of a metaphysic of this is the John. Purpose and behavior is a myth. There is no such thing. This is the ultimate conclusion of the determinists, the mechanistic determinists. So I want you to understand, the mechanistic determinism is the backdrop for everything that comes next. I'm going to drop that thing yet? Slide 8. Plato. I told you this is a survey, so I didn't dive too heavily into every thinker. So this is a qualification comment, as near as I can tell, Plato has nothing major to add to this discussion. He accepts the premise of determinism, but locates the causation of human action in man's character. So basically, it goes like this. Plato offers this explanation. Moral choices are necessary for the soul to achieve a heavenly state in the afterlife. Therefore, the choices are freely chosen, but his character, once acquired, determines his ultimate action and his ultimate end. And here is a quote. I'll let you guys browse this briefly because it's long and I want you to get it in your head. For those of you online, I'll read this to you here in a second. Thus, all things have a part in soul change, for the cause of change lies within themselves. And as they change, they move in accord with the ordinance and law of destiny. If their changes of character are unimportant and few, they are transferred over to the surface of the soul. If they are more, and in the direction of grave wickedness, they fall into the depths and the so-called underworld, the region known by the name of Hades, and the like appellations, which fill the fancy of the quick and the departed alike with dreams of dismay. If a soul have drunk still deeper of vice or virtue by reason of its own volition, and the potent influence of past converse with others, when near contact with divine goodness has made it especially godlike, so surely is it removed in a special place of utter holiness, and translated into another world, another and better world, or, on the contrary case, transported to live in the opposite realm. That was a wordy way of saying that man's character has the ability to send him to basically to heaven or hell. Man freely forms his belief system, but once formed, the beliefs are the causes that shape man's character and ultimately determine his eternal state. Plato equates moral action with achievement of eternal damnation or rewards. But the question is, how can you have moral action if human action is determined? Enter Aristotle. Of course, you will know, having listened to my lectures, that I think Aristotle is a philosophical hero. His ideas, he stands, I wish there was a metaphor. He is the Empire State Building of philosophers. But he would be the Empire State Building if no other skyscraper existed. He, on some level, had the benefit of Plato, Socrates. But what he did and what he managed in his time is unparalleled in human thought. However, having said that, there were a series of errors within his position. Do I think he should be condemned for those errors? Not even close. Part of our problem is we really don't have the sum of Aristotle's thoughts. I mentioned this, I think it was last year or the year before. What we do have of Aristotle is actually pretty narrow, and it's pretty hard to read, pretty hard to get through. So Aristotle did hold a similar view to Plato. He held that human character was the ultimate defining measure of what determines man's existence. Our choices might be predictable, but that predictability is the product of character, and character is man's long-standing action. This is from the Nicomachean Ethics. I don't think I pronounced that right, but somebody can probably explain it.
I think that's right. Nicomachean, yeah.
We'll take it.
Nicomachean.
Okay, good. So here's what he said. Still, the inattentive man is himself responsible for having this character by living carelessly, and similarly by being unjust, by cheating, or being intemperate, by passing his time in drinking, and the like. For each type of activity produces the corresponding character. Just as it was up to us to throw a stone, since the origin was in us, though we can no longer take it back once we have thrown it. Similarly, then, the person who is now unjust or intemperate was originally free to acquire his character, so that he has it willingly, though once he has acquired the character, he is no longer free to have it. However, now he is agreeing with Plato, but he is also presuming a substantive free will at the undercurrent, at the foundation of his comment. He presumes that man takes on character, but first he takes on his actions. This is actually not the total sum of Aristotle's thoughts on determinism. He correctly identified that the root of the discussion on determinism was causality. And this is the first time we see causality become a central issue within the philosophical structure. Here's what Aristotle wrote in Physics. We do not have knowledge of a thing until we have grasped its why. Hear what he just said. We do not have knowledge of a thing until we have grasped its why. That is to say, its cause. Notice, and this is a very important issue, Aristotle is making the correct relationship between the identity of a thing and human identification. He is pointing out that the question why is really what is the root of causality. Anytime you hear somebody say why, they are already presuming the root of causation. And they are expecting you to offer validation for the root of causation. Put that in your thinking, because it's actually going to become important, I think, in lecture 3 or 4.
Children do that all the time.
All the time. And the reason is because man has a necessity to understand his existence. Ostensibly, everything that you see is existence. And what makes it understandable is to understand why. What is the cause? Why does this work this way? This is an essential question of human existence. And Aristotle correctly identified this from the beginning. To account for why, Aristotle provided a comprehensive analytical standard. He broke down causes into 4 categories. He broke down causation into material cause. This equals the change or movement which is determined by stuff that comprises the moving or changing thing. This is, for example, a chair will change or move in accord with the stuff of which it is made, wood, stone, or metal. Formal cause, not to be confused with parties requiring tuxedos or dresses. Form. He's saying form, the form of. Wonder Twin Powers, form of, get it, remember that? Are you old enough to remember? Who remembers the Wonder Twins? Form of.
He asked you a question.
That's all right. He's affecting my ego. He came up with efficient or moving cause, the factors acting with, against the thing being changed or moved. Example, the efficient cause of a billiard ball being struck by a cue stick, right? And the final cause, the end toward which the thing is directed. Example, a seed acts towards becoming a full adult plant. And last, Aristotle introduced what he called accidents into the discussion of causality. And unfortunately, this probably causes more problems than it solved. I understand why he did this, but basically accidents for him are chance, or effectively non-causality. Slide 14. Nor is there any definite cause for an accident, but only chance, namely an indefinite cause. It is obvious that there is, this is from Metaphysics, book 5, and this one is from book 6. It is obvious that there are principles and causes that are generable and destructible apart from the actual process of generation and destruction. For if this is not true, everything will be of necessity. That is, if there must necessarily be some cause other than accidental of that which is generated and destroyed. Will this be or not? Yes, if this happens, otherwise not. Aristotle's summary said there can be a first uncaused cause. There is no definitive cause for an accident. It is possible to trace any sequence of events back to its origin and find an accidental event. And many such causal sequences contribute to events, including human decisions. I want you to remember, why is really the question, what is the nature of the cause? Aristotle introduced chance into existence. Accidents are self-organizing causes, and chance equals indeterminism. Now this is going to cause some metaphysical problems later. The introduction of chance into human action. But I want you to understand this is where it first emerges. So, of course, like I said, we have hard determinism, and the underlying question that we have in Western thought is how can man have a moral requirement if in fact he is determined? And we get to Epicurus. Now, Epicurus really doesn't dominate Western thought, but he does introduce and formalize what Aristotle introduced, as near as I can tell. He said, of course, if man is merely a sum of causation, how can he be held morally responsible? If the world is made up of natural laws, then it follows that man is subject to forces beyond his control, therefore man cannot be held morally responsible. Causal necessity destroys moral responsibility. The question has been implied in all previous discussions, but no one had been given a satisfactory answer. About 40 years after Aristotle, Epicurus offered this solution to the moral conundrum. He accepted the atomist premise. Atoms do move through the void. But to account for free will, he suggested that atoms at random swerve. The swerve was thought to account for atomic collisions. Collisions were thought to be the source of things. The swerve, atoms are dropping down vertically, and they would automatically just go to the right, or left, or up, or down, whatever. The swerve is what causes new causal chains. The new